Most of our member companies are the Fortune 100 type of companies, which for me is okay because that means those guys are well taken care of. What we're really talking about, and what really excites me the most whenever I travel around the United States, is to really try to make information and to really raise awareness for the thousands of other American-based businesses that are not Fortune 500 types of firms. Because if the big boys know where these opportunities are, there's no reason why that the rest of America's business community should also not recognize there are fantastic opportunities. And for those who already know a little bit about the markets here, like many of you, one of my first messages I always say is that if you're a medium-sized firm, you're thinking about, how can I do international business in Asia? A lot of folks would be surprised that probably the most efficient, easiest, and maybe even most cost-effective place to start looking at opportunities in Asia is by looking at establishing a presence or linking up with folks in ASEAN. And the reason why I say is because, and I'll note this going forward, ASEAN is these 10 countries have already an extensive network of free trade agreements with all of the major economies in Asia, including China, including India, Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand. So a lot of the multinationals set up shop in Southeast Asia to take advantage of greater market access to those other markets. There's no reason why other smaller and medium-sized firms could not follow that same kind of strategy. It's been noted already that these countries, when combined, 600 plus million people, combined GDP of over 2 trillion. 30 years ago, the big boys used to look at these markets as a place to maybe make things, lower costs, ship out to the rest of the world. That's no longer the case. The second thing I want to highlight, ASEAN now represents opportunity to really get closer to your customers and to really the consumers of your goods and services for tomorrow. The multinationals are already kind of evolving their strategies. They're no longer looking at doing business in these places because it's cheaper. They're doing business in these places because this is where the customers are, this is where the growth is. So that's the second point I want to highlight. Now, we've talked a lot about sort of the growth and why these markets are so dynamic. Average GDP growth 5% over the next 3 to 5 years. 3 to 4 underlying factors I think is important to highlight. Number one, the demographics. Not only are we talking about, again, a significant population base, but it's a young population base. These are going to be the consumers of goods and services of tomorrow as they go into the workforce. Second important driver is the process of urbanization. Folks moving from rural communities into some of the larger cities, whether it's in KL or Bangkok or Manila. You've been to these parts of the world, you know these cities are growing, probably at a pace that requires some additional investments in infrastructure because the traffic in Jakarta and places like Manila is getting really, really tough, so to speak. But that's a reflection of this urbanization dynamic. But we all know when people move from rural to urban centers, again, the demand for newer products, newer services, for housing, education, healthcare, these again are the new drivers that are really shaping the growth. You can talk about, again, for that, that older play of cost of doing business. The reality is, just as we sometimes in our own history, firms packed up, left the United States, go to other markets where things are cheaper. Same thing in ASEAN. I know Malaysian companies that have packed up, left Malaysia to go to China because things are cheaper. Well, we're now seeing that evolution continue. Firms that were once in China, packing up, going back to Southeast Asia. And here we're talking about some of the frontier markets, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar. These are countries which, again, 10, 15 years ago, folks weren't really thinking about these societies as good places to do business. But that's rapidly changing. And I think if anyone, last year, I finally was able to say I've been to all 10 ASEAN countries when I took my first trip to Myanmar. Very, very, again, a country that 5 years from now, 3 to 5 years from now, there will be lots of things that business wasn't thinking about in terms of Myanmar that we'll see on the radar screen going forward. But that also, again, is a reflection of, again, the evolution of the AEC, why it's so important. People have talked about, again, I think, and we know that this audience probably doesn't really need it, but Southeast Asia. Some of the reasons that really make it very, very exciting and very, very interesting. Again, for the big multinationals of the world, like why does everyone sort of want to be in Southeast Asia? And I think some of these sort of metrics highlight what is very important about these countries. Singapore, probably known as sort of the easiest place to do business. where you can set up your presence very, very quickly. If your IPR is very sensitive, it's going to be protected. If you're looking for skilled talent and labor, again, for high-tech or R&D work, you can be there. 5 of ASEAN's 10 countries, some of the world's most connected nations. Been mentioned earlier in terms of internet penetration. Indonesia, largest Facebook user in the world, so to speak. Young people using mobile devices for all different types of activities. Electronics is probably the industry of the last 10, 15, 20 years that Southeast Asia is most known for in terms of really being plugged in. A $19 billion semiconductor sector. 80% of the world's hard drives made in Southeast Asia. You used to say 10, 15 years ago, if you had a Dell laptop in America, 1 out of every 2 was probably made or assembled in Malaysia, because that's really where Dell's sort of global supply chain was located. Today that's changing though, because as the newer economies like Vietnam have come into the space of being able to also get involved in the high-tech manufacturing place, countries like Malaysia and Singapore have moved further up the value chain, now doing more in services, more in R&D, those types of activities. Agriculture, Vietnam, global leader in terms of several commodities, cashews, rice exports, fish products. Singapore, #1 in the world in terms of logistics. Probably I'd say if there's any other port that's just as good as the Port of Los Angeles, it's probably the port in Singapore, given the kind of global and world-class technology that port utilizes for its operations to really make sure its movement of goods. That exports of over $1 trillion per year in goods from Southeast Asia just as further symbolizes the significant global role that these 10 countries play. Now, several things I mentioned is sort of about the US-ASEAN trade links. And again, to me, this is where the story I think is going to get more interesting going forward. 80 billion in terms of US exports, make America's 4th largest export market, two-way trade, over $200 billion. People are oftentimes surprised when people discover that on a per capita basis, the 10 countries in ASEAN import twice as much goods and services from America as China does. Twice as much on a per capita basis. It's 10 times as much in terms of India. So in other words, these are societies, and again, many of you all know this, but a lot of Americans don't. These are societies that are familiar with American products, know our brands, have incomes, and are becoming much more excited consumers. We've talked about before about California, again, being #1 in terms of that US trade partner. Here in the Los Angeles area, my organization did a study in partnership with the East-West Center and a think tank in Singapore in 2013. So here in the LA area alone, almost $2 billion a year of exports in goods and services. That number has continued to grow, I'm sure, in terms of 2014. And roughly 10,000 jobs here in terms of some of the LA congressional districts. And again, that's indirect support and directly supported jobs here. To me, one of the more exciting things about this relationship going forward is it's really no longer a one-way street. In other words, US companies trading or investing. We're now really seeing a lot of investment coming into the United States from Southeast Asia. And to me, that's one of the more exciting things about the evolution of this relationship, where we're seeing, if any of you attended the sort of the Select USA conference in Washington a few months ago, it was fantastic to see a number of Thai companies, a number of Singapore companies, a number of Malaysian companies, all here in Washington talking about we're looking for investment opportunities throughout the United States. And I think that's where, again, California's got obviously a great opportunity in play to make as that one of the really the first gateways that companies and investors from the region may look at. Ambassador, you know this, but some folks don't. So Malaysia's sovereign wealth fund, Khazanah, their government-linked investment arm, now it has an office in the United States, and they chose San Francisco as basically the place to locate their first American office. For those who don't know, Khazanah as an investment company outside the United States is actually the #1 private operator of hospitals in the world. People are going, wow, you know, a Malaysia holding company has owned hospitals all throughout Southeast Asia, Brazil, Turkey, and other major markets, again, as a private-owned corporation. We're now seeing, and I've known a number of examples of where again, Khazanah and even Temasek and others investing in property, so, you know, leisure and resort type of place, but also in terms of technology. There's lots of interest from some of these investment arms to work with technology players, entrepreneurs, startups who have exciting new developments in certain areas. And I think that's an important area we should keep that in mind, because this is really the future. Again, where it's more of a two-way flow and dynamic. Now, obviously, what we're all talking about today is really the evolution of ASEAN and the formation of the ASEAN Economic Community. Very exciting. The first thing we want to do, though, we want to be candid and honest. On December 31st, 2015, there will be a big celebration to say the AEC is formed. But let's be candid and honest. On January 1, 2016, there's still going to be a lot of work ASEAN must do to really make this AEC the reality that it's going to be. Because if you're really talking about ASEAN becoming more of a seamless sort of marketplace with all the consumers, where again, if you're making a product and you're selling it in one country, standards and regulations are all the same across all 10 countries, that's still a work in progress. In some sectors, it's in place, but there are lots of areas where again, ASEAN will still need more work to do. If we're also talking about the AEC being a single production platform, where you can really manufacture something in one country, assemble another, ship in a third place. Tariffs are very low, but there are still non-tariff barriers that ASEAN still must really effectively reduce. It's one of the things that Malaysia, as ASEAN chair, is really focused on this year. Getting all the countries to really, let's fully implement all the agreements that ASEAN has already put in place so that we can really move this AEC forward. But in this process, though, we're definitely seeing new opportunities and sort of the next generation of growth drivers. First and foremost, aviation, which again, I think a great opportunity here for the state of California, where there's lots of aviation players, rapid growth in the aviation sector throughout Southeast Asia. The world's fastest growing, low-cost air carrier in the world, again, a Malaysian company, but really an ASEAN company called AirAsia. Actually, hopefully later this year, they're going to have their first direct route via Tokyo into Hawaii, at the end of establish that little bit of increase of U.S.-ASEAN connectivity. But throughout the region, the real rapid increase of air traffic is really part of the sort of the connecting of people in Southeast Asia. You no longer have to, if you want to do a holiday and you want to go to the beaches in Phuket and maybe something, in Penang, you no longer just have to fly into each one of the capitals to then connect to those other destinations. The connectivity is really strengthened now, so you can fly directly to 2 or 3 of those fantastic locations for holidays. I mentioned healthcare and education services. Many of the countries are now in the process of implementing sort of private education, or have private education, but those that are growing. A country like Vietnam, we're going to see rapid growth of private education, private healthcare as they continue to move their economy. So that's going to be an important growth area. And with the region, again, looking at such a robust growth dynamic, the multinationals will tell you the one thing that they are concerned about in Southeast Asia, which to me is an opportunity, is the ability to produce talent. So those of you who are in, let's say, in the education space, technical training and vocational training, these are areas where there's going to be great demand for those types of services in different ASEAN countries going forward. Again, so services, one of the things that America does really, really well. I think, again, an important opportunity. Infrastructure, my goodness. Well, we all know we have big infrastructure needs here in our country, to say the least. But in Southeast Asia, they've also got big infrastructure needs. Perhaps one of the differences that we might show from a business point of view is the ability to finance deals. Perhaps might be a bit better in Southeast Asia than here in the United States right now. There's going to be a lot of competition for project opportunities in Southeast Asian economies, particularly in projects that really connect. So whether you're talking about ports, rails, power generation, Indonesia right now talking about 25,000 megawatts of power they want to create over the next 5 to 10 years. These are going to be significant opportunities, I think, for U.S. Players. Key thing will be, you've really got to be there to really, I think, tap these kinds of opportunities. Financing, given the fact that we all know with the China-led Asia Infrastructure Bank, Japan now announced that it's going to mobilize another $100 billion in financing targeting Asia infrastructure over the next 10 years with ADB to make sure ADB remains relevant sort of in the infrastructure finance. We all say sometimes competition is very healthy. Well, I think we're definitely going to see some competition for financing of infrastructure projects throughout Asia in the years to come. People also should know ASEAN also has its own infrastructure financing institution called the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund, based in Malaysia. So again, financing of projects is really probably not the challenge. Oftentimes the project challenge might be, how do these projects get designed in a way to really attract private capital? So once again, if you're a company or a service provider where you're really into the project design, that to me is an opportunity where there's going to be great potential. Last but not least, and again, people can take a look at the whole startup scene in Southeast Asia is really, I think, what very excites me. Every government in Southeast Asia is really focused on their small and medium-sized enterprises. But I think we're now really at a point now where we're seeing the development of ecosystems to really support entrepreneurs and startup companies. Well, needless to say, what better place, expertise, in terms of really creating a culture for startups than you can have here in California, where you have Silicon Valley, where you have other great locations for really how you really go about fostering entrepreneurial development. What types of things you need to do. I'm very excited that there's a Silicon Valley-based VC firm called 500 Startups that 3 years ago launched an ASEAN fund, where they actually have dedicated people who are in Southeast Asia, who are basically moving around to all 10 countries and basically finding these young, talented entrepreneurs and investing in these companies. And really bringing in, again, some of that Silicon Valley expertise and mindset of how you really go about growing your businesses. These are going to be very, very exciting times, I think, moving forward for where we can see greater potential. There's obviously challenges that one has to navigate in the region, and this is where, again, the AEC process has to do a better job. As countries are coming together, there are still certain degrees of sort of nationalist and sometimes protectionist policies that governments still try to put in place. Those will have to be continued. As there was a big conference in Singapore last week where a number of the sort of the top ASEAN corporate CEOs, as well as several government officials, said we do have to really put more of our political will in ASEAN if we really want to create this AEC. We've got to go harder and try even more to remove barriers and really tap into the potential of our societies. Some of the emerging developing countries, there's still work to be done in terms of getting them up to speed in terms of accounting standards and governance standards, so at least international levels. But again, that's also an opportunity. We're finding right now, some of our members who are in the accounting space are seeing great potential in really doing training courses for accountants, for those types of professional services, so that those countries and those markets move up the scale, so to speak, in those opportunities. And then last but not least, competition is going to remain very, very stiff in Southeast Asia. Everyone wants to be in Southeast Asia. China, Japan, Korea, America, Europeans. And let's not forget, ASEAN's own companies are getting stronger and much more competitive. So they're now going to be stronger competition for American firms. But to me, that's also, I think, another potential for opportunities. Because one of the things that I've been talking about in different parts of the world, now I'll begin to wrap up here, is what does ASEAN's sort of central role as really Asia-Pacific's leading regional economic hub represent? Particularly in terms of some of these new trade agreements that are being negotiated. So whether we're talking about the TPP negotiations that the US is involved in with 4 ASEAN countries, or we could be talking about the ASEAN's negotiations of the RCEP negotiations, basically harmonizing their 5 free trade agreements with China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand into a single agreement. And the reality being, ladies and gentlemen, any agreement that has China and India in it commercially is something which you must take a look at, you must understand, given the size of those markets. But to me, that just, I think, puts together the next generation of an opportunity for US-ASEAN economic relationships. TPP is going to strengthen economies from Asia and Latin America and South America, with the United States right in the middle. My friends in Florida are kind of getting excited about that opportunity, given how the state of Florida kind of feels very good about their links in South America. But I think the United States, that's an opportunity to really leverage. The RCEP negotiations, again, I know there are large firms who are looking at, if I could just get better market access into India's market, I could see real opportunities. Well, I don't see us doing a bilateral FTA with India anytime soon. I don't think they'll be ready for it. But I think by being in ASEAN, and ASEAN successfully getting better market access in India's market. That's the kind of strategy that, again, the big boys will leverage. But there's no reason why smaller and medium-sized firms could not also look at that as an opportunity or a way to access that market. And then last but not least, one of the good things, and again, I'm preaching to the choir here because you all really represent some of the most important resources. Because obviously, again, the multinational world, they've got money, they've got people on the ground scattered all over the place that can do this kind of work to build these relationships. It's great here in California. I'm really seeing, again, an ecosystem that's going to build those kind of relationships. You've got fantastic CGs out here. You've got fantastic support from the mayor's office, the Port of Los Angeles, the Chamber of Commerce. These are all resources that, again, you're already tapping into those resources, but trust me, other states don't have those same kind of resources to really help out. If you're a company that really is already committed to really being in Southeast Asia, definitely tap into the various investment promotion authorities and boards, whether it's the Singaporeans or Malaysians or the Thai, all have people here in the United States that are being paid, in a sense, to work with American-based companies. That's another great resource. There are millions, I should say millions, but there's consultants out there that are also well, if you really are that committed to this part of the world and you want to get that kind of expertise. So there are lots of resources that I think one can tap into. I think the main thing, of course, is to just know where to go. And for someone just starting out, let's just always say your taxpayer dollars are already supporting the U.S. embassies in each one of the ASEAN countries. They are a resource for you that you're already paying for. Definitely utilize those resources. Every one of the ASEAN countries has an American Chamber of Commerce. That's a resource that everyone should be tapping into. Some of the AmChams and some of which are stronger than the others, but they're all there to work with you. And then last but not least, I would say if you are at a point where you're not only thinking about one country, but you're thinking about multiple countries as part of your business development strategy, you might want to give my organization a call, the U.S. ASEAN Business Council. I think that's one of our real strengths. We've got offices in 6 of the 10 ASEAN countries where we can support our member countries. Our headquarters here in Washington as well. So ladies and gentlemen, I've been preaching to the choir. You all already know everything I've already just said today. So it's just really exciting to be here for you. I'm looking forward to hearing what some of the CGs can offer in terms of their remarks. And let's keep this kind of dynamic ecosystem going forward. I think it bodes well for California and for ASEAN. Thank you very much.